We will have a networking event tonight, but there will be still time to enjoy Luxembourg, although the sun sets. By the time we finish, the sun will have set, I'm sure. The next section is on digital Europe. So I do entice people to come back into the room on time. I can see many people still enjoying the lunch break and the conversations outside, but I'm going to just try to give them 1 or 2 more minutes so that they can join us here in the room, because I don't want them to miss this part. And again, to all of those who are joining us online, I know that there are 5 cameras in the room, so hopefully you're getting a feel for what it's like to be in the room with us here today. And thank you always for staying tuned and joining us online. So if I have not yet. I don't yet have the go-ahead to start the next section. So we still do want to encourage everybody to come in and join us from outside. Okay, so we will start because, again, I don't want to diminish the time the panelists have, and we have a very esteemed panel. But before we go to the next panel and the next section, which is on Digital Europe, please welcome to the stage Teresa Czerwińska, who is the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, and she's going to set the scene for the next section on Digital Europe and how Europe is stepping up investment in cutting-edge technologies. Please welcome Teresa.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests. It's my pleasure as a Vice President of the European Investment Bank responsible for tech and digital to welcome you to this panel on Digital Europe, a framework for innovation to flourish. And the fact that we are addressing the topic in our program underscores the EIB Group's strong commitment to disruptive technologies, innovation and digitalization. They are at the core of our 8 strategic priorities and essential for Europe's prosperity and security. The EIB Group is widely recognized in the digital and innovation sector. Over the last years, we have supported several unicorns, which are now well-established companies, including WePay, Klarna, WeTransfer, Spotify, Skyscanner, to name just a few. In today's rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and clean energy innovations are reshaping global competitiveness. Europe has long been a hub of scientific discovery and engineering excellence. However, as Mario's Draghi report highlights, we must accelerate our efforts to sustain our leadership in the digital age and build on this momentum. Innovation and digital must be at the heart of European renewal. While Europe accounts for 17% of global GDP, our share of the world's top technology companies is still disproportionately low. Only 4 for the top 50 tech firms are Europeans. This highlights our increasing dependence on external technologies, particularly in areas like microchip manufacturing, cloud storage, and software development. We stand at the pivotal moment in the global race for tech innovation. Today, to remain competitive and to reverse negative trends, we need to do more in boosting tech leadership, cutting red tape, expanding access to capital for scale-ups and startups, and investing in skills and talents. As the EU Bank, we have been steadfast in our commitment to support digital innovation, RDI, over the last decades. With more than 16 billion euros RDI investments only last year, we have invested in numerous digital and AI projects and are transforming industries, enhancing competitiveness and improving the quality of life for European citizens. The EIB Group is also the main implementing partner of the InvestEU program, designed to boost innovation and job creation across Europe by de-risking investments. Under InvestEU, the group signed over 24 billion euros of financing across the 4 main policy windows: sustainable infrastructure, research and innovation, support for SMEs, and social investments and skills. But there is still more to be done to support companies throughout the different stages of innovation and business cycle. This is why we are working on a new initiative, TechEU, to bridge the financing gap to support disruptive innovation, strengthen Europe's industrial capacity, and scale up companies which invest in AI, clean tech, critical raw materials, energy storage, quantum computing, semiconductors, and life sciences. Our target is to invest up to 20 billion euros under TechEU initiative in 2025. And over the 3 years period, TechEU will generate a total of 180 billion euros investments, focusing on 3 EU growth engines: clean tech, digitalization, and biotech. TechEU will aim at scaling up, de-risking, and mobilizing private capital through enhanced and new tailor-made financial instruments. To drive Europe's digital future, we will focus on 4 key areas. First, digital infrastructure, essential for both innovation and ensuring security and safety across the continent. Second, investments in innovation and R&D, the very foundation for disruptive tech. Third, supporting SMEs and startups, the true backbone of Europe's economy. And finally, last but not least, a strong focus on investing in skills and digital education, ensuring our workforce has the skills to adapt and thrive in the era of constant technological change. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let me assure you that European Investment Bank Group is very committed to fostering innovation, to finance green and digital transition in Europe. I very much look forward to the insightful discussions and exchanges that will take place today and to working together with you, public and private partners, to build a brighter future for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And now we're going to move on to the panel discussion, and hopefully there will be time for questions from you in the audience as well. To lead the panel, please welcome to the stage Jean-Christophe Laloux, who is Director General, Head of EU Lending and Advisory at the European Investment Bank. And the panelists are Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, Director General for Digital Europe, Boris Andrijanic, member of the Governing Board for the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, Vice President of Kumo.ai, Carme Artigas, co-chair of AI Advisory Body and works with the United Nations as well, and Miroslav Sviezeny. Sorry, I'm so sorry that I mispronounced your name. A co-founder and Chief Operating Officer for Carme Computing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you, and we're going to spend a bit less than an hour together. In preparing this panel with my co and fellow panelists, we thought about doing 2 things, trying to do 2 things together. One is to tap on the very, very long-standing expertise of the panelists here to try to give you a true talk about where we stand in terms of digital Europe, but remain positive and try to focus on what to do, right? That's our focus, and we'll try to keep this in mind throughout the whole panel. And the second thing is to make the panel as interactive as possible. So for that reason, both we have agreed that panelists would intervene, and we're going to try to keep this as an open conversation as possible, but we are definitely going to try to have at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So unless you want to have a look at us for 15 minutes doing nothing, please sharpen your pencils and get ready with some of your questions at the end of the panel. We'll try to have at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So the flow of the panel today is that we'll start with Cecilia in a moment, from a quite broad brush perspective on where we are in terms of digital Europe and try to see what can be done to accelerate if acceleration is required. Then we'll go a bit more into AI, the hot topic of the moment. And for those of you who may have been to Davos in Switzerland, I don't think there was a single stand on the main street that was not about AI this year. So it's really the hot topic at the moment. So we will devote a bit of time to it, and with both Mark and Carmen try to look into aspects of development, intersection points with raw materials and regulation. And then with Miroslav, we'll try to get another point of view, which is the point of view of an entrepreneur, and try to understand for someone who is in digital and in tech, what are the particular factors that you would like to bring forward as elements to accelerate business development in Europe. So that will be the flow of the panel for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. So with this said, let's start. So Cecilia, I would like to lean on what I have found one of the most striking comparisons that have been made between the US and Europe recently, which is to consider the top 5 market caps in both markets. And in the US, as we know, the top 5 market caps are companies created less than 25 years ago, all in digital. And when you take the same thing in Europe, all the companies in Europe have been created more than 100 years ago, and none of them have digital in their core business. So there is clearly there a difference in the market. Does this, in your way, reflect an inability of Europe to be proficient in terms of digital? And where do we stand in terms of Europe using the digital world?
Well, we are lacking far behind. That's the honest truth, right? We are leading in one technology, and we know it. It's connectivity. We have leadership positions in some of the other critical technologies like green tech, like biotech, manufacturing tech. But the honest truth is that we are lacking far, far behind in scale. Why? Fragmentation, over-regulation, huge burden. 10 years ago, we had a burden on companies that is equivalent to 200 billion per year of regulatory burden. That's 10 years ago. And just reminding how much, since then, how much regulation we have and how much we have coming into force now. And we have lost 30% of competitiveness. And Draghi, it was spot on when he said, mainly due to the fact that we missed the scale and speed revolution. I can tell you, I've been a CEO myself, I was building a global company, and when I went abroad with it, when I came back to Europe, people were talking about cloud is just a buzzword, but with cloud and with AI and with the data, we basically disrupted how we did digital. So normally it would take like maybe between 5, 10, 20 years to get a mature technology. But the cycle there on innovation went down to 2-3 years. And with AI now, and with what is happening in Ukraine, where their cycles is down to 2 to 6 weeks, the gap between the regulatory framework, the structure of member state by member state procurement, and so lack of scale of investment, member state by member state implementation of regulation, and all these kind of things, we're widening the cultural gap of business and public sector and the structure of Europe. And we were unable to change. Somehow we missed that game. Now, having said that, that's the situation we're in. I mean, we could actually solve many of the CO2 problems that we have if we just deploy the current technologies that we have. We don't even need research and development. Sorry, I know that I'm very unpopular when I say that. But the tech sector knows how to innovate. So by even just deploying, for example, in the new housing initiative, some of the technologies on CO2, bringing down CO2 emissions that we can, digital twins, AI in the energy grid, heat pumps, we could solve a lot of these problems. It's 40% of CO2 emissions. If we look at defense, I mean, the reason why Ukraine is so efficient in defense is that they are 1 to 800 soldiers. because they use technologies. For them, technology is an enabler of life. So now that we're going into the next investment round, it is a huge opportunity for us to say, okay, how do we create a digital defense of our critical infrastructure, water supply, energy supplies, houses, transportation, and what are the technologies that we need there, from drone jamming to drone technologies to satellites to decentralized heat systems that we will hear on in a second. There is nothing that Europe doesn't have, but we have no scalable demand. We don't have scalable demand, and that's where we need to focus. How do we ensure scalable demand of technologies?
Okay, so let's get there. We are 450 million consumers in the European Union, larger than in the States and larger than anywhere else. We have the biggest market. So why is it that we don't have scalable demand, and what needs to happen for us to get there?
How do we buy military gear? We buy tanks and planes national. Have you ever seen a technology survive in a country? I mean, we do startups and scale-ups. They get purchased like this because, of course, right now the game is you innovate, you scale, you are either the winner, the loser, or the seller, right? And that kind of scale of investment, let's just say that we think differently. We don't think about, first we need to do something in the universities, then we need to do something here, and then we need to, and we just say like, we're launching a large-scale procurement process program to protect critical infrastructure. Let's just take the energy sectors. We could take hospital and airports and other things. What kind of technologies do we need to protect energy supply? Decentralized energy systems, drones jamming, satellites, AI to protect us against cyber. We need all of the connectivity that we lead in, advanced secure connectivity. All of a sudden, instead of doing it like Denmark and then, maybe Bundesländer in Germany and then a little bit in France, apart we are super small and nobody can survive there apart from companies that are already so big and typically not, only in one country. So how do we make sure that we get these large-scale incentive plans where we say, can you innovate and do your research and development while you actually implement this stuff? Then you get deals, you get references, you get funding for doing something real. Businesses know how to do that. We don't need like a separate program for innovation and then a separate one for something. Just give us the problem to solve at hand, right? So there are huge opportunities there if we can do things together.
All right, so your main message here, and the first message is we have to pull better our forces together to aggregate the demand and actually to create a sense of direction. But that, by definition, requires, as the President was saying this morning, that we unite and that we actually coordinate things better together, right? And maybe we can talk a little bit later about why maybe this is so far not happening. One final question for you, Cecilia, and then I'll go over to Mark. Can you talk about your experience in terms of infrastructure in Europe? And I was thinking in particular about telecom infrastructure, which was also one of the elements pointed out by Draghi, who said, in Europe we have 34 telecom operators, we have 365 or virtual operators, whereas in the States there are only a handful or four of them, which by the way does not seem to be driving the prices higher in the States. So it doesn't probably hold true that a lot of numbers necessarily drive the price down, because I don't think we pay less in Europe for our telecom than in the States. So is this one of the bottlenecks that we need to solve in order to deploy specifically digital infrastructure, which is very closely connected to...
Yeah, and we can take it as a school example, right? Small is good and big is bad. And what we got was nothing. We didn't get the innovation. We didn't get the capex spending that we wanted. We didn't get the opex optimization out of it because we wanted to stay country by country and small and not allow mergers. And let's just imagine that 25 years ago we said like, okay, let's just have, we can see in the other countries and continents they have 4, maybe we just don't need 10, right? So there's still competition in the market. Imagine the scale of innovation that we would have let loose across Europe just in that sector. Then, for example, we had the Siemens-Alstom, merger. I mean, train signaling is that even a technology? I mean, honestly, is it even a technology? I mean, so we have to just break those barriers and say, okay, right now, we have new technologies every second week. So how can we restrict them from merging? I mean, every time we merge, there's a new technology, there's a new one, right? So we need to allow and look at our competition policy for sure, but not only in telecom, across the board, I think. Okay. And then maybe one other thing. I think the gap has really widened culturally from the private and the public sector, where you see, maybe too much, but okay, let's not discuss other people's problems, but you see US people have, private sector inside, outside, walking in and out. You see even in Japan how they have a really close, they forecast, should we regulate like this industry? Does it help you to become more agile? No, it doesn't, you should do like this, okay, We need to be even much more agile in the way that we collaborate. And I'm really glad to see EIB and, President Nadia Calviño has really opened up that dialogue. How do we get a much more agile collaboration model between private and public sector? I mean, don't kid yourself. 99.9% of all technology innovation sits in private sector, and they either sit here in Europe or somewhere else. And if there is nobody to work with, I mean, it's not very popular to say, but if you ask the really front runners, they're not considering Europe right now, right? Yes, in the early stages, but as soon as it has to go really fast to compete, they go to the States. Yep.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Very interesting, and we'll come back to you. But maybe now to Mark. And Mark, you've been in charge of digital, right, in your own country, in Slovenia. You've been minister in charge of it. So maybe
guilty as charged.
So maybe a few reactions to what Cecilia said, and also, from the perspective of a smaller country by number of inhabitants and size of the economy, compared to this call also for more consolidation, for grouping things together, where we sometimes hear from smaller countries that they are reluctant to go in there because they feel that they're going to be absorbed by the larger ones. What is your perspective on what has been said?
It's a great question. And first of all, Cecilia, thank you so much for bringing up Ukraine as a fantastic symbol, not just of resilience, but also innovation and agility. And not just in the area of defense technologies, where Ukraine is clearly leading the way in the area of drones as well as cybersecurity. I'm also referring to GovTech, meaning government technologies. You may not know, but over the past 10 years, Ukraine has become arguably the most digitally developed European state. Their government app called DIA is second to none. In fact, it's so good that even Estonians are copying it as we speak.
Estonians who are known amongst Europeans to be some of the most advanced in terms of government digitalization.
So Ukraine is basically the new Estonia. And using this app, any citizen can basically undergo any administrative task in a minute or two. It also can be used as a digital ID, which means that you don't have to carry any physical document, at least in Ukraine, any longer. Now, what's stopping us as Europe and European country from scaling up DIA across our countries and providing our citizens the same kind of simplicity and convenience as is currently enjoyed by the Ukrainian citizens every day? So, going back to your question, if you look at Europe as a whole, the situation is not great, but not hopeless. But interestingly enough, if you look at any index or ranking of top digital countries in the world, you will consistently find 4 European countries among top 10. I'm talking about countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and so on. So we clearly know how to do it. The question now is how to scale innovative solutions like DIA or successful policies that have been adopted in those top countries. So I would suggest, rather than trying to recreate the Silicon Valley, which is very unique, we should look at our own digital champions and learn from them and scale whatever they've done right across the entire continent.
May I give one comment?
Yes.
Sorry, I know
Please,
there are
please go ahead, Cecilia.
But you are so right. We just started a group on public sector digitalization, and we have companies from each member state. So Nortel, Netcompany, they're just coming in every day as we speak. And they have a dream of being European champions in GovTech, right? And they're like, well, they're just doing regulation. Couldn't they do like investment programs in this, you know? So we have these companies, you know, an EID and all these things, right?
Yeah.
Cecilia, let me highlight one. So when you mentioned Davos, I remember two words from Davos this year. One was AI, the second one was Trump. And the reason why AI was so prominent, because there were two very fascinating developments during and around that week. First of all, the launch of DeepSeek, and secondly, the announcement of the Stargate initiative by President Trump, which clearly showed that US wants to win this game no matter the cost. And the thing is that the Chinese government has ever since pushed all the public institutions, all the state-owned companies, and all the other major industrial giants of China to integrate DeepSeek. Now, Europe, on the other hand, has several very successful AI companies. One of them is Mistral, which recently launched Le Chat, or Le Chat, their most advanced chatbot, which is, by the way, faster and arguably better than its American rivals. And what's more, it's open source, and your data actually stays in Europe. Now, which of the institutions, governments, and companies represented in this room is using Mistral and their products? Now, I think we should support our champions. We should be proud on them because we actually have them. And I'm not talking about Chinese-style top-down directives. Let's just not live in an illusion that Chinese and US governments or top companies will ever rely on European AI. We will have to bet on our own successes and products.
So your message is clear, Mark. But let's dig a little bit deeper in it. Is it a problem? So your message is we have to lean on the technology that we have, which is consistent with what Cecilia was saying. We have to scale them up. We have to use what we have, and we have the technology. Okay, if we take that as the starting point, is it a problem of supply because the companies do not grow fast enough because of some factors, maybe financing factors? By the way, little parenthesis, EIB tries to actually come up with scale-up facilities and venture debt and things that actually allow to pump more money into it. Or is it a problem of demand due to the fact that the demand is not aggregated enough? Or is it a problem of both? I mean, what do we do?
I think it's a problem of both. I think this, the fact that we haven't completed the digital market in Europe is something that Cecilia talked very eloquently about. I would mention the second point, which is the investment part.
Is the digital market complete, according to you?
I don't think so.
Ah, okay. So
the thing is that when it comes to tech investments, we lag behind. And if you look at top 4 tech companies in America, Meta, Amazon, Google, and
Apple.
Exactly. They will be spending this year alone $320 billion on AI infrastructure and cutting-edge chips. We're talking about, enormous investments. And also China. DeepSeek came as a shock to a lot of the people, but in fact, it came on the back of a decade of investments in AI that were very strategic, not just from the Chinese government, but also Chinese businesses. They invested over $200 billion in AI over the past 10 years of public money. I'm not even mentioning private investments alone. So the good thing is that Europe is waking up now. We've heard a number of announcements from French President Macron about those 109 billion euros invested in AI infrastructure in France. We've heard about the European Commission announcement of Invest AI, which will mobilize 200 billion euros, again, in AI infrastructure across Europe. But what we need to do now is unlock private funding. This is where Europe is still too thin. And my specific proposal would be to start unlocking European pension funds. Now, only 0.02% of total assets of European pension funds that amount to over $3 trillion go into the European innovation ecosystem. The US pension funds arguably invest more in European technology than our own. So this is something that we need to approach from the regulatory perspective and also from the business perspective, because we know the major VCs in the US are powered by American
Yes.
pension funds. So here's a proposal for you.
Okay, it's very clear. And by the way, on pension funds, there was also an interesting finding recently on the German pensioners much more exposed to Silicon Valley than to their own German companies. And 90% of what is invested is actually in the US and only 10% in Germany on German pension funds. So that's also maybe something else we'll be able to talk about. Okay, Mark, if you agree, I'll move move across to Carmen. And Carmen, as Mark actually talked quite a lot about the same topics, you will get much more on the AI and on artificial intelligence. So, just preparing this panel, I had somewhere in my document an overview of everything we have in terms of regulation at the moment. So we have the European Chips Act of 22, we have the Digital Markets Act of October 22, we have the Digital Services Act of 22, we have the AI Act of 24, we have the Council regulation, amending regulation with regards to European High Performance Computing Initiative with the 7 AI factories. So it seems we are well equipped in terms of regulation. Would you agree that the level of regulation we have is appropriate for the development of AI, or is it too much, too little? What should be done? What is your view on this?
Just as a disclaimer, I'm not a neutral person here because in my former role as State Secretary in Spain, I was the leading negotiator of the European AI Act during our presidency. So I'm the one to blame for the fact that we managed to prove it. And then in the last year and a half, I've been the co-chair of the United Nations Advisory Body for AI. Therefore, proposing recommendations for the global governance on AI. And I would say is that the reason why we don't have European champions is not because of regulation, it's because of legislative fragmentation. So the fact that we have learned from the past, we cannot have 27 different legislations and regulations. The fact that we have moved from directives to regulation is a very positive thing in the last 5 years. So we have Data Act, the ESM, the EMA, and AI Act, which is one regulation that comes to force to 27 member states at once. And that's something we can manage. What we cannot manage is 27 different regulations. And for example, even the EU AI Act cannot be fully adopted if we still have 27 different copyright directives country by country. So I think the move from directives to regulation is a very good thing. And regulation is not either good or bad, it's either common sense or not common sense. And I think what we need to ensure is that when something is well defined, and I can really vouch for the right balance of the EU AI Act, it can be really not materialize the benefits of this regulation if we cannot make a efficient implementation phase, which is now being in the discussion. How can we work with the industry to translate all this regulation in code of practice that make it actionable? And because we want them to comply. Because what I've learned from these last 2 years of experience is that people merge 3 different concepts that are interrelated but are not the same. People merge ethics, governance, and regulation. So the companies come and say, you don't need to regulate me because I already have an ethics guidelines in my company. First of all, we have counted more than 80 different ethical guidelines on the big tech, plus the ethic guidelines of UNESCO, plus the G7 guidelines on Hiroshima. And ethical guidelines are very fine to have, but they are not objective, they are subjective, they are not compulsory, and they do not respond for accountability. What is important is governance. What are the systems, what are the instruments we must put in place to ensure that companies and governors, developers and users behave ethically? And regulation is one of these instruments, but it's not the only one. We need to combine regulation with market incentives, with transparency tools, with monitoring tools, because we need to overcome the vision of the 20th century that regulation is designed to control the private companies. No, regulation is an instrument for policymakers to ensure and allow for a market to flourish. And I would say that the AI Act in particular is a very powerful tool for Europe to be competitive. The problem is that we are losing the battle of the narrative. You are making us question our principles and values. And starting by the fact that people think that the EU AI Act regulates AI. The EU AI Act does not regulate AI. It only regulates the high-risk use cases of AI. But we're buying the narrative that we are not going to be competitive because we have in the EU AI Act. And that's absolutely the opposite. Can only evolve at the speed of trust. And all the huge investments we are seeing in the AI world are only on CapEx, are only on infrastructure, in chips, in data center, in pre-training. Nobody is using AI. Nobody is spending OpEx in AI yet. Now is the time of the truth. What are the use cases? What is the return of investment? It's a huge CapEx. And this huge investment in CapEx can only have a big piece of return in two circumstances. Everybody is using the mainstream, and all the vertical sectors in the world are adopting AI. Therefore, we need to trust with these systems, to retrain those systems with our particular industrial data, something where Europe is particularly competitive, and we should really ensure that our industrial data is resident in data centers, in cloud environments that are placed in Europe. So we have a huge opportunity to build trust in consumers and build trust on citizens so Europe can be the leader in adoption of AI mainstream. Yes. On this vertical sector.
And just a follow-on question on this, Carmen, if I may, two follow-on questions. One, and you were talking about the adoption of technology, and actually also referring back to the Draghi report, very often point of discussion nowadays. The difference in productivity, in particular between the US and Europe, is due to a difference in adoption of new technologies. It's not so much a question of how many hours we work, it's much more a question of productivity due to adoption of new technology. So how can we, in your mind, in particular for AI, accelerate the development or the adoption by European companies of these new technologies, which seems to be really the root cause of us lagging behind in terms of productivity, and since you mentioned it. And then I'll come to another question on your idea about fragmentation.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with the comments of Cecilia and also Mark, the fact that Europe doesn't lack innovation capacity of developing our own champions. And the fact that we haven't had regulation for the last 10 years and we haven't had a champion. So this is not the reason why we didn't have a champions. We didn't have the champions, we didn't have access to money, to investment, to make our startups become scale-ups. So we produce the same number of startups per year in Europe as the United States. The problem is when these companies grow up and need to scale up, we don't find in Europe the amount of money and funding that we need to really become unicorns. And also the competitive policies say, okay, these companies cannot merge because they are too big for Europe. No, they are too big for Europe, but too small for the world. And especially in the digital sector, the only profitability is we really have access to bigger markets and we can scale up. So that's number one. We need to allow for more access to funding. The European Investment Tech Champions Initiative is a good example. Thinking about releasing pension funds is a good example. We also need to have access to an exit market, exit strategy. What happens? I mean, when a big company needs to decide where to go public, needs to choose if it goes public to France, to Spain, to Germany, to Italy. Why don't we have a Euro NASDAQ? Because the alternative to go public to the NASDAQ or to the States. So we need to think about exit strategies too. And then aggregation demand. We have a 600 million consumer market, but we are not acting as one market. And we already know the diagnosis. We have the Draghi report, the Leto report. And I think we need to generate demand and coordinate all these funding projects. And then we need to help the traditional industry evolve to a more digital industry, and we need to invest in, of course, skills for the labor force.
But why is it in your mind, and as you are now decided to go back to the private sector, why is it, do you think, that European companies are less prone to adopt new technologies than some of their peers elsewhere in the world? Why?
I don't believe that. I mean, I think that worldwide, nobody is adopting AI yet. We are creating a lot of noise about all the investment that's going to R&D, pre-training of the models, chips manufacturing, chips development. Now the AI battle is moving to the energy battle. So the battle for AI today, as you see, all the general purpose models and systems are all alike. They can only improve with two things: if we retrain those models with private data, so not the battle is against our private data for industrial vertical solutions, and the other is who has more muscle, who has more computing power. So the battle is for computing power of the control of cheap energy sources. And nobody is adopting yet AI, but it will adopt in 2025. The regulation needs to be streamlined, needs to be more agile, needs to be more unified, but don't think that the US doesn't have regulation. US has 150 different regulations on AI, but they are vertical, sector by sector. So there's a lot of room for improvement, there is. But the other, as long as we create the ecosystem, AI is not a single technology, it's an ecosystem. And it has dual use, it affects all vertical sectors, it affects society, and it can continue to evolve without human agency. And that makes it particularly different to any other technology. This would, I think we need to have regulation to be sure that when we adopt it, we do it right first time, because there will be no second chance to revert back the potential harm we do if we don't do it right.
Okay. Mark, Cecilia, any reaction on what was mentioned by Carmen in particular? And thank you, Carmen, for debunking this idea that the EU AI Act is about regulating AI. I think it was also, for me personally, very instructive.
Oh, just like to add one thing. So AI Act is primarily there for building trust. And one of the key takeaways from the investment report that was published by EIB today is that 6% more American companies are leveraging big data and AI than European companies. Now, since I'm part of an AI startup based in California, but driving the business here in Europe, I can tell you that European corporations like to work with other big companies and not startups. And that's not the problem of regulation. Perhaps regulation like the AI Act can solve this problem by bringing trust into the system, so that larger companies will be more willing to leverage AI solutions of smaller companies, because those companies and those solutions will be compliant with the AI Act. I can tell you from my own experience, the sales cycle for AI products in the US is 3 to 6 months. We're talking about enterprise-grade solutions. In Europe, it's between 6 and 12 months, which means that we are lagging behind. And I would slightly disagree. In one point, AI today is everywhere. It's powering our customer support, it's powering our R&D efforts in our top pharma companies and everyone else. So AI is already everywhere. And unless we adopt it to a larger extent, we simply won't be able to compete with our American and other peers.
Thanks, Mark.
Let me just
Carmen?
one thing that I just say, okay, that's the right answer. The reason why we're not adopting AI, because we have a problem of innovation and cultural mindset in the traditional industries in Europe. It's a question of a speed, it's a question of risk-taking that, of course, the American companies do much, much better than us. So it's a question of mentality. And I like very much the comment on the previous panel, Sel, do not differentiate industry policy than the startup policies or innovation policies. We need to bring together the traditional companies with the startups to change this mentality. So it's our own, would say, roadblock.
So is it a matter of education, according to you? It's a very complex problem, but... Cecilia, I don't know.
No,
you want to
I'm
react
sitting
on
on
this?
my hands because, of course, I'm not only just a big fan of regulation and saying it's not the, money is money. If 10 years ago we had a burden of 200 billion euros in administrative, non-productive innovation cost for regulatory burden, today it might be like at least threefold and rising. Our members tell us that their regulatory compliance burdens and their staffing of this, so lawyers instead of innovators, is increasing by 15% every year. And I am sure that it was meant very well, but I can tell you, medical device manufacturers, they have no idea why on earth their products are now under the AI Act, because they are already regulated in their sectorial regulation. And I could continue, not only with this sector, but many, many other sectors. So there is a big cultural problem of not testing a product before it goes to market. And with a product, I mean a regulation.
Yes.
That we really understand the consequence and overlaps and the spaghetti balls that we are creating with on top. And I'm not saying that the meaning of it was not well and that the banned practices should not be banned. I'm just saying we are creating insecurity And in the end, what company does, they give up, and then they say, okay, but then you move the R&D elsewhere. And that is the truth. And unless we face that truth, we will lose the game. We need to be better at doing what we do if we want to regulate. So, and I just want to say, I mean, I totally agree. Let's unlock the pension funds. Let's take a real check on the regulations that we have and use some of all this money to innovators and adoption of AI and all the things that we think is just a cultural problem. I think it's a money problem, because I actually think we're more innovative I don't think we have a business problem. I think if we had the scalability, we would do it, but a lot of the R&D of the European companies now are elsewhere because of this spaghetti ball. So unlock the potential. Why don't we create tax incentives for critical tech adoptions EU-wide? We just do a tax incentive. The council could take that decision. You know, all investments done in OPEX or CAPEX investments in adoption of secure dual use or critical technologies, they will have tax credits. That's doable. Why don't we say we will launch, you know, cross-EU huge procurement program in technologies to protect critical infrastructure? I mean, that's what brings it. You know, I think Europeans have high values, no matter what it is in private or public sector, and I think we need to help each other to get back on track.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Very interesting. Carmen, I shall, before moving over to Miroslav, I shall ask you to react a little bit to what Cecilia said about the burden of the different regulations. And since you participated to it,
I agree. We need to vote over that. Well, I think that the trend, I think, the initiative of the EU Commission to do an omnibus legislation that really now realizes that I mean, we have a room for improvement, of course, but that there's a need to question the need for regulation to create interest for consumers and the principles and values. We can do much better on the implementation side. So it sometimes happens that a very well-designed regulation, when it comes to implementation, it becomes a burden. And I always say that the problem is never the big tech, the problem is the small and medium companies. We know the example, the worst ever possible example of GDPR that costed a lot of money to the SMEs and 2 years the moratorium. And this is why we are interested that nobody is asking for a moratorium because it's so complex. I mean, we need to encourage that this is adopted as soon as possible, because that will establish the rules of the game in Europe, and I think that gives us a competitive advantage.
Okay, thank you very much. So now across to Miroslav, Carmen just talked very briefly about the intersection between energy and digital. And Carmen, I think you said that indeed a lot will depend on the access to cheap energy, and that is a debate in itself. But as it happens, Miroslav, your company, maybe you can describe what your company does, is really at the intersection of both, right?
Yeah. I will perhaps, of course. I will explain perhaps first what we are doing exactly at Carme Computing to understand better all the debate, but there are so many interesting things I heard here. Carme Computing, basically, we are providing cloud computing services, especially for industry. If you are, for example, if you are designing a car or a space launcher, you need to design your product on computers, and then you need to simulate your product on computers before manufacturing a physical prototype. This is very important. You know, before simulation, like a company like Boeing, were manufacturing 27 wings of a plane. With the simulation, now they are manufacturing only 2 prototypes. So the more computers you can access easily, but very easily, the faster you will develop your product. Okay. So what we are doing at Carme, we are providing cloud computing platform. This is the first asset. And then we are providing the servers, the computers. And the difference we have among all the cloud players is that our servers are not hosted in a traditional data center. Our servers are in a special casing, and this casing enables to retrieve 95% of the heat from the servers, and it's transformed into hot water. And the whole thing is placed not in a data center, it's placed in the basement of a swimming pool or in a district heating network. It's directly connected to the pipes, and we are selling the hot water to the district heating. So we are heating people with computing, with high-performance computing from Andrijanic or any company making computing. So that's what we are doing. So yes, of course, it makes sense from the energy point of view. So of course, Carme, I totally agree. There are several things in this digital infrastructure. You have access to energy, and of course, that's why there are so many SMR, the companies making small reactors, nuclear reactors. It's mainly for data centers. Okay, access to cheap energy, cheap and clean energy. But then the rest of the infrastructure, you have networks. We talked about it. You have the data centers, but data center is only the building. It's a real estate thing. Okay, and then you have the servers. And this is one of the questions I'm asking. Who is operating? Who owns even the servers in the European soil? Who is owning these servers? Most of them are American companies.
And we hear indeed cases of American in the Middle East investing in major server infrastructure on ground, which is going to be considered like embassies to be American ground, so that they continue to own the service.
So when we are talking about digital infrastructure, we have to think about who is operating and who is owning the servers. We can have champions like Mistral. By the way, I'm not sure that the investors in Mistral are only European investors. That's very interesting, this case, Mark, because when Mistral, they raised 100 million euros, we said, okay, we are the perfect provider to work with them. They never speak to us. You know why? Because one of the investors is Microsoft. So they have to run all the simulations on Microsoft. Yeah. So in terms of investment strategy, we have to have the right ideas on this. Infrastructure is very important, and the question is, yes, who is owning this infrastructure? And investing in digital infrastructure in Europe, it's investing, of course, in networks, in data centers, perhaps in innovative companies like ours, and it was the case because we were invested by EIC and EIB, but also investing in the servers. Because otherwise, we will have perfect models, but if we are not mastering the infrastructure, if one day we don't have access to this infrastructure, the model will be useless. All the services will be useless,
So Miroslav, talk to us a little bit about the development of your company and how you see it, because you are actually in a sector which is probably a sector where you meet very tough, big, large shoulder companies, and you are coming with an innovative business proposal, for sure, but is a very small company to start with. So what is going to make or break the development of the company, and what do you advise that we have more attention for in the development of your company and future smaller companies?
I will tell you one thing. On the cloud HPC market, given the model we have, we are not building a data centers. We are not. We have the part of our infrastructure financed by the selling of the heat. Basically, when we come to the market, to the HPC market, we have to pay for the server and the electricity running into the server. That's the minimum. And because of this model, we have the cheapest offer on the market. We are 2 times less expensive than Amazon, Google, Microsoft. We are 4 times less expensive than an American company called Rescale. They're offering same platform, but running on AWS servers. So
local is less expensive.
So it's the best price. The carbon footprint is the best, because we are not spending any money and energy to cool down our servers, and we are giving value to the heat. So every simulation running on our infrastructure, you bring down by 80% the carbon footprint. It's huge. And we are in Europe, in France, in Italy, Denmark, on the European soil.
So you're going to make a fortune then?
How is it possible that when it comes to I will not tell the name of the company, but we made a benchmark for a big French company. They made benchmark internally at Google, at Amazon, Microsoft, and Carme. As they said, oh, wow, guys, you have the best price-performance ratio. How it comes that we still don't have this contract from this company? I think we
You
will
were not
get
friendly
it.
to them?
Sorry?
You were not friendly to them?
Yeah,
I don't know.
probably. I think we will get the contract within 2-3 years. Société Générale, which is one of our biggest clients in France, it took us, I think, 10 years to get the contract we have today. So we were talking about acceleration, and Mark, you said something very true. It's the trust. The trust. Because, you know, especially in IT, changing the model, changing the way you are addressing IT, you are consuming HPC, it's an effort, you know, it's a risk. So if you're an IT guy, why you want to take this risk? If you are working with Microsoft, okay, there is a problem, yeah, but it's Microsoft, it's okay. So why changing? You see? So that's the thing. What is the trigger? What we can do to change this?
Yes. So Miroslav, we promised that we would be positive and coming up with solutions. So
yes,
give us one proposal to increase trust in the young startup companies like yours.
What is very impressive in the United States? When the Americans find a good technology, okay, of course it has to be a very good technology. So you have to prove it, you know. And perhaps I have an idea because there is also one point about the European champions, how to identify the company and how to be sure that you will invest millions of euros on the right company. So that's also one point. But in the US, they find the technology, they make massive investments, even public investments, okay? So that's good. Now it's starting with EIB, we were witnessing that. But it's quite recent. It's a very good thing that now Europe is able to invest not like 500K, but like 8 million euros in a company. That's very good. But it's not enough, because as I said, what makes that all the companies, all the small, medium, and big companies have this trust. The difference in the US, you have also, and this is correlated to the investment. You have big public orders. We were discussing with French public companies, 50 meetings, and still, nothing. So you have to, if the technology is good, the price is good, the impact is good, everything is okay, we should find a way to make, because 1 million euro of public order, it's much better for a company than 1 million euro of grants or 1 million euro of investment, because that gives the trust to all the other companies in saying, oh, if I'm not using Carno and this very good platform, sorry, I'm very biased on this, I will be late, so I have to do it now. You see, so okay. That's one point, and the other point I was talking about
because we will then
yes,
go over
sorry,
questions.
about how identifying the right companies. Instead of giving 1 million euro to a company, give 1 million euro to a panel of companies to say, spend this money to this company and tell me what the service is. Is it really performant? Is this technology reliable, secure, everything? That the money will come to the company?
That the companies be the judge.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then, if the return is good, you know that you can go on and invest a lot of money on this company.
Okay, thank you very much, Miroslav. Super interesting and very much to the point. So, ladies and gentlemen, and dear panelists, before we switch to the Q&A, and we still have a bit more than 10 minutes, and just to get you in the mood, and please sharpen your pencils again, and as promised, so temporary conclusion, what have we heard from our panelists so far, and maybe you will inspire some of your questions. So some of the ideas around the table is large-scale procurement process and use large-scale procurement strategically, both from Cecilia and from Miroslav. This is a theme that you both used. Their consolidation in telecom and potentially in other sectors as well. Increased collaboration model between public and private, and more connections between the two. Mark said, let's copy Ukraine in terms of the digital governance model and learn from the best, and potentially unlock some private money through the pension funds, and there was a whole, indeed, debate amongst ourselves, and I think we kind of agree that capital market union, all of this, pension funds, etc., that all of this is important because we need to scale up companies more also on the supply side. Let's make a clear distinction between ethics, governance, and regulation, and decrease fragmentation. That was your take, Carme, as well as develop cheap energy sources as a precondition. And then, Cecilia, you also finalized with let's create an EU-wide incentive scheme for adoption of AI, and let's use the incentive. So these are some of the things that I heard from you panelists around the table. So let's hear it from our audience now. Who has, please, a question for our panelists? There is, and I'm sorry, there is a lot of light there, so I can't see anywhere there, but I definitely see a gentleman there in the back with a question. Please introduce yourself and address your question to one of the panelists. Thank you.
Yes, hello. My name is Nasser Zuberi. I run the national initiative in Luxembourg for the digitalization of financial services, the Luxembourg House of Financial Technology. Fascinating discussion. I heard from you actually something, in summary, quite simple, at all levels, which seems to be the challenge and the problem. Fear of failure and risk aversion, be it from entrepreneurship, investment, from customer demand, getting things wrong. But sadly, I think that also from what I've heard here and what we see, it extends up into the national level with regulation, because that is what drives a lot of the regulation, and also ultimately with the speed at which policy is dictated and implemented in Europe. So what are we going to do to change that dynamic at the national level? Because this, to some degree, we're talking here about Europe and the people in the room. What would be the one thing that you will do, people of power, people of significance and influence, what will you do to make things happen tomorrow? What one key thing will make a difference?
You should have been the panel moderator. Honestly, that's a beautiful question.
I'm happy to answer.
Let's have a take.
No, but I think we are doing something. I mean, Digital Europe represents around 45,000 companies. We have spent like 1.5 years to come up with how to streamline regulation, so 80 concrete proposals. Also, we have, we call it cut, simplify, incentivize. We are talking about these large-scale procurement. We are trying to work with the EIB now, basically to be much more agile in the way that we speak with between industry and EIB on the offers that EIB has. I see Nadia Calviño and the Vice President have really revolutionized how the investments can be done, more defense, more green, more directly to companies scaling. I think things are really happening, right? So I'm going to support that process. And if somebody calls me and say like, hey, EIB wants to do like a call with 45,000 companies to explain what can we actually do with you guys, I will make it happen right away. So, or we want to meet with CEOs and discuss how we can do this, I will make it happen. This is about a unity that we haven't had for a long time, but we decide how we work. We decide what we do about it. And I think both the President of the Commission and the President of the EIB and the Vice President who's sitting here are excellent advocates of that change, and I'm going to support it.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Mark?
So I couldn't agree more. We need to encourage risk-taking and celebrate founders in particular. And I'll give you a couple of specific examples of proposals. First of all, we need to do something about the taxation of share options on this continent. And we also need to do something with our bankruptcy laws that are outright punitive. We also need to celebrate founders, because success breeds success. We need to encourage them not to retire on this beautiful continent, but to start another company and finance the third company. We saw Daniel Ek being the principal investor in Helsing, which became the principal European defense technology champion. And there are many examples like this. And I think there are little tweaks here and there in national legislations, as well as at the European level, that can make together a big difference.
Good. Carme?
I have another hat here, which is advisor, member of the advisory body of ESNA, European Startup Nation Alliance, where we are producing a benchmark of the best-in-class indicators in Europe that allow for a thriving startup ecosystem. And we are just working this moment on recommendations for the 28th regime. We have the opportunity,
the 20th regime, we haven't talked about.
So we have a good opportunity to define a more agile, a unified, and simplified legal framework for startups and SCLABs in Europe, and that involves stock options, red tape, and also investment.
Okay, thank you very much. Miroslav, did you want to have a take?
I love the idea of being celebrated, so that's perfect. No, I like the tax incentive. Tax incentive is very good because it goes in the right way. Public orders and tax incentives, that's
very good.
That would be great.
And I would personally add my voice to the 28th regime, which I think would add a lot of things, and also say, let's celebrate our successes. We shouldn't be afraid from time to time to celebrate our successes. But
that was such a good point.
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
Such a good point.
And
I mean, so
this is closely linked to the...
And please do not buy the narrative. Feel proud of being European. Yeah. This is not a battle of two. This is not a battle about United States and China and the winner takes it all. There's a space for many, everyone of its own model, and I think probably the battle is not large language models, it's more small models, use cases, adoption. I think we have plenty of room to have our space.
Thank you very much. Interesting question, interesting answers. I think there is another question there in the public. We still have about 5 minutes.
So, my name is Ciprian Stănescu. I come from Romania. Congratulations on the panel. I think you did a good job, even a great job.
Thank you for celebrating our successes.
Yeah, I mean, let's celebrate moderators as well.
We're celebrating a lot.
But besides that, I think this is one of the best panels of the 3 forums that I've been a part of. We have been trying to copy the Silicon Valley model for decades, and it doesn't really seem to work for some reason. What would you say is a new model to create innovation at the startup level in Europe, first? And then second, I would really love if Cecilia could explore for 2-3 minutes a pan-European procurement idea, but not what you would do, but what do you think should be done in practical terms in the next, 2 years, 5 years, specifically on that. So innovation model, how do we create startups that are better, first, and then second, this pan-European procurement system?
Thank you very much for the double-barrel question. Cecilia, would you start maybe with the second part of the question?
Wow, that was 2 questions in one, and were, all of them I could speak half an hour about them. So on procurement, let me start by that. Yeah, I promise. On procurement, let me start by that. I mean, we just heard companies don't, we don't have a research and development problem, right? We have a commercialization problem. Companies are not leaving when they are startups. And by the way, startups don't pay tax, so they don't, in that many sense, create a lot of value also. But where they leave when they have to scale. I did 2 scale-ups, and you look at you're like, where is it? And they go like, oh my God, what a mess, It's just, we need public procurement to be the scalability front runner in Europe right now. Yeah. And what I would do is say, can we get EIB in there as a partner to make sure that to facilitate, this, I don't know, I'm not an economic specialist. You're shaking your head. We couldn't.
No.
But I'm just saying, what we need is basically to have public procurement. Companies need deals. We need deals. Whether you call it projects or public procurement or whatever, we need deals, and we need to address the urgent biggest challenge that we have. It's the silver bullet. If people don't have water, if they don't have electricity, if they don't have safety in airports and hospitals, if they don't have secure connectivity, nobody needs to send a missile. We already lost the war. Yeah. So, and we should learn from Ukraine there, and we should make sure that that is where we put our money. And that's where we need green tech, drones, AI, drone jamming technologies, satellites, energy optimization. It has everything in one package. So for me, this is what I would do.
So maybe a daring thought, maybe let's use the 28th regime to run common procurement processes across Europe.
That's one of the proposals,
That is maybe a good idea that we will put forward.
And then I would just say...
On the first question, Silicon Valley.
The Silicon Valley. But honestly, I think it's the same, because we cannot... we also cannot say a Eurasian model does not work, because it does work, right? I mean, they do have that growth and they do have their... So we also need to look at what do they have. They have a huge public demand in defense, and they have kept that demand, and we didn't. Now we are creating it. And I think what we are doing now also with the EIB being able to invest directly in companies of scale, not of startup, of scale. You know, when they are going into, we want to be listed, I am not selling out. Immensely fantastic. And then one thing I actually used to be the head of the grant committee, export grant committee of Denmark, and I had no idea how to spend money, only on how to earn them. But what I learned from the UK, they had this model when they did public procurement that said 25% needs to go to small and medium-sized companies. And it created a huge growth across the UK. So that's one other tool that we can use. Instead of just having the big companies go running with all the deals because it's the safe, why would you change? Nobody gets shot for doing the right thing, right? And if it goes wrong, it's somebody else's fault who can pay the bill. Okay. But if we actually dedicate, you know, across these tenders, 25% to medium-sized companies, maybe that's it. Maybe we say 35% of all EU and EIB funding, no matter whether it's in agriculture or green or housing or whatever, goes to digital innovation within those sectors, right? Good. There's so many tools. Yeah.
Right, look, we'll leave it at that. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that our screen says that we are over time. It's flashing red, so I feel compelled to stop discussions under this extremely interesting panel. Thank you very much, Cecilia, Mark. Thank you, Carme. Thank you, Miroslav. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, and wish you a happy rest of the forum.
Thank you so much. That very dynamic panel. Very unusual to have such a dynamic panel post-lunch, but I think it's because we had a delayed start to the day, and it was really very wonderful to have some audience questions as well. And I'm